Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Welcome to the Wolfman Chronicles. This is Chapter 12 of Book 8, which makes it Episode 102. From Cambodia to India, the Moon Tiger. The morning sun spilled molten gold over the turquoise waters of Koh Rong, turning the waves into sheets of glass. Palms wrestled in the warm breeze, the air heavy with the smell of salt and hibiscus. The tide whispered at the shore, the same way it had every morning since they'd arrived. Only today, it was saying goodbye. They stood together on the sand, Jack and Sasha, Rachel, Miguel, Nadia, and Julian, their bags stacked neatly beside the longboat that would transport them to the ferry that would take them back to the mainland. No one seemed in a hurry to move. The island had become more than a resting place. After the chaos of the Cambodia and Thailand missions, its quiet nights and sunlit mornings had felt more like a gift. Now, none of them wanted to leave. Rachel held a seashell in her palm, the last one she'd picked up during her early morning walk. It just doesn't feel like we've been here long enough, she said softly. I'm kind of sad about going back to Alaska. It feels like we stepped into a whole other story coming back to the island, and I'm not sure I want to go back to the old one. Sasha smiled and put her arm around Rachel's shoulder. I understand. She exchanged a glance with Jack. What they hadn't told her yet is that they weren't returning to Alaska. Just yet. At least, not all of them. Now, they had intended on telling her on the long boat ride back to Siem Reap. Miguel had to return to Alaska. There was no question in his mind. Months earlier, he had made the Mavka a promise, and Miguel was a man who kept his word. The Mavka was no ordinary woman, nor was she just a ghost story or some wild spirit of the Alaskan wilderness. She was real and dangerous and heartbreakingly beautiful. The forest spirit had made a bargain with Miguel, and in the process, she had taken a piece of him. Something intangible but essential. His heart and soul was bound to her like roots to the earth, and though he could move freely in the world, part of him always remained in her realm. It wasn't love in the way that most people understood it, though there were moments when Miguel wondered if it might be. But more of a binding pact, one that pulled at him every time he tried to ignore it. If he stayed away too long, the pull became pain, and the pain became weakness. She had called to him again, wordless but insistent, and he knew that he couldn't refuse. Jack and Sasha had quietly decided Rachel would return home with Miguel, giving her a chance to start the school year in Alaska and have just some semblance of a normal life. Grizzly and Rosa were there as well. Well, they had planned on telling her about their next mission once they had left the island. They knew that Rachel would hate to be left out of anything that smelled like adventure. But Dara's request was an urgent one. Children were disappearing without a trace. A predator that moved like smoke through the mangroves, and whispers of an ancient guardian spirit called the Bon Bibi was terrorizing the Sundaban. Locals spoke of tiger tracks where no tigers had been, but Tara believed it was human traffickers using the legends to cover their crimes, and she needed Jack's help. The truth of the disappearance of over 100,000 girls reported missing across India was staggering, and Jack suspected it was something far more dangerous than a supposed legend of a tiger. Rachel looked at Jack, then back at Sasha. "You're not coming home with us, are you?" she asked. Jack hesitated. then crouched slightly so he could look her straight in the eye. "Not right away," he said. "There's something we have to do in India, something that we can't ignore." "India?" Rachel protested. "Really?" Her mouth pressed into a line, and she looked down at her sandals softly grinding into the sand. "So, you're going to go help them," she finally said, "and leave me behind." Sasha brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Your safety is the most important thing to us, Rachel, and that's why we're sending you back with Miguel, so you'll be safe, and so you don't miss school." Rachel swallowed hard. There were so many things she wanted to say, but she nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "So I have to wait for you in Alaska and worry every day if you're coming back or not." Miguel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Look, I'll make sure they hurry," he said with a faint smile. The long-tailed boat's engine coughed to life, a mechanical rattle that seemed to cut through the moment. As the boat pulled away from the Korong, the island's lush hills blurred in the shimmer of heat and distance. Jack found himself watching the shoreline until it was nothing but a green smudge against the horizon. The sea spray was warm, but the wind off the water carried an edge, a whisper of places unknown. For just a brief moment, he thought about his life back in Montana, when his only worries were how much cattle prices had dropped and how many calves he had lost to wolves. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. So many things had happened in the 2 years since he'd been just a lonesome cowboy on a ranch in Montana. Dara sat opposite him, her travel bag tucked at her feet, eyes intent. "There's more you should know before you decide for certain," she said, breaking Jack's reminiscences of his former life. Jack glanced at Sasha, who leaned in to hear more of what Dara had to say. "In the Sundarbans," Dara continued, "whole villages are terrified. At first, they thought it was the tigers. There have been man-eaters in those forests for centuries, but this is different in that they target mostly young girls. There's no claw marks, no signs of struggle. The girls just vanish. Families leave offerings at the shrines to Bon Bibi, hoping that she'll protect them. But the disappearances keep happening. The authorities, they blame smugglers, human traffickers. The locals whisper that it's something worse." Jack frowned. "Worse than a man-eating tiger?" "Yes." Dara's voice dropped. "As I've said before, superstitions often mask the truth. Many villagers say it's not an animal at all, but a spirit. One that wears a man's skin during the day and a tiger's skin at night." "In other words, a were-tiger?" Sasha asked with a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "Do you really think this might be supernatural?" "Al, I don't know what we're really dealing with here, but I do think it's the kind of thing that only you can help stop," Dara said directly to Jack. "And what the heck is a Bon Bibi anyway?" Sasha asked. Dara laughed. "Seems like Miguel might be familiar with this one. A Bon Bibi is a revered forest goddess worshipped in the Sundarbans. That's a mangrove forest spanning India and Bangladesh. She is considered a protector of the forest and its inhabitants, particularly those who work in the forest as woodcutters, honey collectors, and fishermen. She supposedly protects them against tiger attacks and other dangers of the forest. While she may sound like a myth, she is a very real entity to the Hindu and the Muslims who perform rituals and leave offerings before entering the forest to collect honey." The boat surged over a swell, the engine growling, and the wind whipped Jack's hair across his forehead. He glanced toward Sasha. He wished she would return home with Rachel where she would be safe, but he knew she was not going to leave his side, not this time. Her eyes said she was weighing every possibility, every risk. Rachel, sitting between Miguel and her small pile of luggage, stared out across the water. She was angry, in her own way. Jack wondered if he was making a mistake, committing himself to a cause that felt endless. How could one man, or one wolf for that matter, make a difference in this upside-down world full of crime and sadness and superstition? Nadia had been quiet all morning. She glanced towards the sea, then finally spoke, her tone shifting the air around them. The Sundarban mangrove forest is the largest in the world. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Igor told me about it. It comprises the river basin that flows through Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, and Nepal, and finally converges in the Bay of Bengal. Children have been disappearing by the thousands, dozens of them daily. Villages are terrified. They say a white tiger comes under the full moon, takes them, and vanishes. Now, I don't believe in coincidences, not after what we've seen. I think it's more than a folk tale. I think it's connected to what we uncovered in Thailand. Jack's jaw tightened. He knew where this was headed, and now that Nadia had revealed that she was pregnant, he felt the need to protect her even stronger than before. But at what cost? By late afternoon, they were winding through the crowded, colorful chaos of Siem Reap, tuk-tuks darting like dragonflies between buses, women haggling in the shade of canvas stalls, and the scent of lemongrass and garlic curling up through the heat like invisible fingers. Dara led them down a narrow lane to a faded guest house, painted a shade of green that had long surrendered to the sun. The owner greeted them with cold bottled water and keys attached to rusted tin tags. Once they'd dropped their bags in the cramped rooms and splashed water on their faces, Dara gathered them around a low wooden table in the commons area. She reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out a thick envelope, worn soft at the edges and sealed with a strip of red wax. I had this couriered here from Kolkata, she said, breaking the wax with her thumb, from one of our operatives on the ground. She laid out a series of glossy photographs. Some showed smiling children standing outside bamboo huts. Others showed empty beds with small toys still scattered across the floor. And then there were the stranger images. Villages half submerged by the tide, mangroves rising behind them like skeletal fingers, and faint, curved claw marks etched high into the trunks, as if left by something that had climbed downward rather than up. Jack leaned over the table, studying each photo. Now, you said this has been going on for months? Well, years, actually. Dara tapped the corner of one image. A blurry, white gold blur moving between tangled roots. And it's escalating. The villagers believe it's a spirit, a shape-shifting tiger that hunts under full moonlight. They call it Chand Ba, the moon's tiger. Dara slid a final photograph across the table. This one of an altar, a small clay shrine surrounded by marigolds and bowls of honey. A hand-painted figure of Bombibi, the goddess of the Sundarban forest, stood in the center. Someone had scrawled a plea at the base in Bengali. Protect our children. Keep Dakin Ray away. According to legend, Dara continued, the Sundarban belongs to two great powers, Bombibi and Dakin Ray. Bombibi is the forest protector. She's worshipped by Hindus and Muslims alike. She's half goddess, half warrior saint, and people pray to her before entering the mangroves. They believe that she protects the poor, the vulnerable, the ones who come only to fish or to gather honey. Dara tapped the image of the clay goddess, painted in green and gold. But Dakin Ray, he's her opposite. He's a demon king who rules over tigers and spirits and all the things that hunger for flesh. He appears as a man when it pleases him, but his true form is a massive tiger. He preys on those who enter the forest with greed in their hearts. So, Jack folded his arms, Bombibi keeps the balance, and Dakim Rai hunts. Exactly, Dara nodded. Every fisherman and honey collector makes offerings to Bombibi before going into the mangroves. They move flowers, sweets, jars of honey. They hang her image around their boat, and they believe as long as she's watching, Dakin Ray can't touch them. But unfortunately, Dara's voice dropped, the offerings aren't working. Shrines are being found broken, and the tiger isn't waiting for men in the forest. He's going into the villages and taking the children. Jack's eyes narrowed. And no one stops him? They won't, Dara said, because they believe it isn't a tiger at all anymore. They believe Dakin Ray has become something else, something stronger. They call it Chand Bag, the moon's tiger. And they say that Bombibi can't protect him. Well, this isn't just myth, Dara said quietly. Whoever, or whatever, is responsible. They're using those legends to keep people from asking questions. Parents are just too terrified to leave their huts after dark. Children sleep with knives beneath their pillows, and the local authorities are writing it off as superstition mixed with poverty-level panic. Jack exhaled slowly, his eyes still on the photograph. His instincts were already pulling him forward, toward the mangroves, the tides, the shadows beneath those trees. Dara slid everything back into the envelope and looked at them one by one. If you're in, we fly tomorrow night. Kolkata first, then south by train to Canning, and from there into the Sundarban. As the sun sank over Siem Reap's rooftops, Sasha brushed her thumb over the edge of the old envelope, like someone touching the first page of a new story. India, then, she said, glancing at Jack with that familiar wildfire in her eyes. Jack nodded once, his heart beating with a drive that was not unfamiliar. India it is. They gathered in the small, dusty lot behind the Siem Reap's guest house at dawn, when the sky was just beginning to cover itself with thin threads of gold. A taxi idled with its trunk open, swallowing luggage one piece at a time. Another tuk-tuk waited at the curb, its canopy flapping in the early breeze. They should have all been heading to the airport together. That's what Rachel kept thinking as she hugged her backpack, trying not to look like she was fighting tears. Miguel knelt in front of her. You'll be fine, he said gently. We'll be back in Alaska by tomorrow. Nearby, Julian zipped his duffel and slung it over his shoulder. Mexico for me. Juanita's threatening to skin me alive if I don't come home for at least 1 week. He shot Jack a lopsided grin. But I'm going to meet you in Kolkata next Friday. You'll need me by the time this tiger hunt gets a bloody. Jack gripped his hand hard. We always do. Sasha hugged Julian tightly. You tell Juanita thank you for letting us keep you for this long. Julian winked. She was glad to get rid of me. He laughed. One by one they all embraced. Miguel gave Jack a long, quiet look. I'll keep a close eye on Rachel, but you call the minute you need us to come rescue you. I think Rachel here is the only one with any common sense. Jack nodded in understanding. And you might just be right about that. Miguel pulled Sasha into a brief, fierce hug before turning toward the waiting taxi. Rachel climbed in quietly beside him, clutching her seashell so tightly it left an imprint in her palm. The door slammed shut, and the taxi pulled away. Rachel looked back through the window until they rounded the corner, and Jack, Sasha, and Nadia were gone from view. Julian hoisted his bag and whistled for another tuk-tuk, headed to the opposite terminal. 1 week, he called back. Try not to get yourselves eaten before I catch up. Then he was gone in a sputter of smoke and dust. Jack exhaled slowly. watching the streets settle into morning. It always hurt. The leaving, the scattering. Sasha touched his arm. Are you ready? He nodded once. Let's go find ourselves a tiger. Nadia took Sasha's hand as they stepped into their tuk-tuk. The driver cranked the engine to life, and as that little vehicle rattled toward the airport road, all three of them stared ahead towards the unknown, towards India. Kolkata hit them like a living storm. The moment they stepped out of the airport, it wrapped around them thick, wet heat that clung to their skin, a noisy, pulsing heartbeat of a city that never seemed to stop moving. The air smelled like diesel exhaust, frying oil, incense, and monsoon-washed pavement. Traffic snarled in every direction. Yellow ambassador taxis honked at bicycle rickshaws while battered buses belched smoke and swerved impossibly close to fruit carts stacked with mangoes, guavas, and limes. Crows perched on crumbling balconies, cawing above a tangle of electric wires and faded Bollywood billboards. Laundry flapped between buildings like makeshift prayer flags. Children darted through the narrow alleys with cricket bats, chasing rubber balls as goats and stray dogs searched the gutters for anything edible. On one corner, a man in a crisp white kurta poured steaming chai from a dented kettle, the caramel-colored tea arcing gracefully through the air into tiny clay cups. Next to him, a woman squatted on her heels, selling garlands of orange marigolds and strings of jasmine so fragrant that Sasha could smell them through the taxi window. Bright temples painted in every color bled into colonial buildings, left behind by the British, grand structures now cracked with vines curling over their balconies and their door frames. At every turn, the old and the new collided. Smartphones beside sacred statues, neon besides ancient stone. There was a restless kind of an energy, as though the city itself had too much history to ever be still. Beggars tapped at the windows. Holy men in saffron robes moved through the traffic, as though protected by invisible barriers. Hawkers shouted for attention, thrusting paper fans, sliced coconuts, postcards of tigers and gods towards them. And above it all towered the domed grandeur of the Victoria Memorial, shimmering pale in the haze like some incredible mirage. Kolkata was overwhelming, hot, beautiful, brutal, and alive. And waiting, somewhere just beyond its endless noise and motion, was a train track stretching south toward the Sundarban mangroves where the river met the sea, and legends waited beneath the moonlight. Well, they checked into a faded hotel off of Sutter Street, the kind backpackers favored, a place where the power flickered during afternoon storms and geckos clung to the high ceilings. The concierge gave them a single rusty key and warned them, do not drink the tap water. Well, it had been a long flight with an even longer layover in Bangkok. While Sasha and Nadia rested in their room under the slow-moving ceiling fan, Jack followed Dara into the streets, weaving through the afternoon crowds. She led him down a lane lined with stalls selling spices, second-hand books, and brass charms. They stopped outside a little shop barely wider than a doorway, overflowing with beads and clay idols, hand-painted masks. Above the beaded curtain hung a sign in faded red script. Madame Pervine, reader of the hidden sight. Dara lifted the curtain. She's helped me before. She sees things that others don't. Inside, the shop was dim and perfumed with camphor and smoke. A wrinkled woman draped in layers of indigo silk sat beside a wooden table carved with curling vines, her eyes bright as lanterns fixed on Jack the moment he stepped in. You carry the mark of the wolf, Madame Parveen said without introduction. Jack stiffened. Dara offered a tight smile. Told you she was good. Parveen's bangles clinked softly as she reached for a worn deck of cards. You go to Sundaban? She asked, voice like gravel rubbed with honey. Many go there greedy. They do not come back. She fanned the cards face down before him like a magician, asking him to pick. Jack hesitated, then touched one. She flipped it over. The picture was that of a tiger beneath a full moon, eyes made of tiny mirror shards that caught the flecks of light in the room. Parveen exhaled sharply as though struck. Dakim Rai. She flipped another card without his choosing. A woman in a forest green sari holding a curved blade. Bombibi. She stared at him so intently he felt a trickle of sweat down his spine. The Tiger King is awake, Parveen whispered, and Bombibi grows weaker every night. If she falls, the forest becomes his kingdom again. He is hungry, not just for children, but for you. Jack met her gaze steadily. This sounded too rehearsed. Any advice? He asked, without hiding the skepticism in his voice. Yes. She leaned forward until he smelled the ghee and sandalwood on her breath. Do not walk in with teeth bared. Do not forget the old ways of respect. Bring honey for Bombibi, and never look into Dakin Ray's eyes under the light of the moon, for if you do, he will not just kill you and eat your body. He will devour your spirit. Before he could ask any more, she snatched the cards back and waved him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Go. You have what you need. I have no use for skeptics. The forest is calling. Back on the street, Dara blew out a long breath. Well, I wasn't expecting that, the way she dismissed you. Jack adjusted the bag on his shoulder, his expression dark. They walked in silence, the sound of temple bells chiming in the distance, the sun sinking deeper behind tangled power lines. By the time they reached the hotel again, Jack was already turning one thought over and over in his head. Honey for Bombibi? Would store-bought do, or did he need to find a beekeeper? The question nagged at him more than it should have, but something about Madame Parveen's warning had burrowed beneath his skin. In their world, rituals mattered. Symbols mattered. Sometimes a little thing, a flower placed in the right spot, a whispered name, a cup of blood, or stopped breath, could mean the difference between protection and a mouthful of teeth closing around your throat. As they stepped back into the dim hotel corridor, Jack murmured to Dara, Can you ask your contacts? Can you find out if the villagers leave raw honey or factory crap in plastic bears? Dara nodded without missing a beat. Well, I'll send the message tonight. If it has to be wild Sundaban honey, we'll track a beekeeper before we hit the forest. Jack exhaled slowly, pressing the heel of his hand to his forehead. Look, I don't want to walk into those mangroves already insulting the one thing that might be standing between us and Dakim Ray. Yeah, understood, Dara said, her voice quiet but fierce. We'll get it right. Jack gave a single nod, though his expression didn't ease. As they reached the hotel room where Sasha and Nadia waited, he found himself glancing down at his own hands, already imagining them sticky with the amber offering, and hoping it would be enough to earn the forest goddess's favor, because something told him they were going to need every ally they could get.
And with that, we begin a new adventure in India. Thank you for listening to this week's story, and I hope you'll join us next week as the adventure continues. And until then, have a great week, everyone.